Hello, and welcome back to DPRK Athletics. Today, we're going to be discussing how landmark athletics reforms helped unite a diverse and changing DPRK society during the Chollima Era. This was a lecture that I gave in March of this year at the University of Sheffield. It was part of a conference entitled Reflections on the North, so this was kind of fitting in with the conference theme, and it was a project I've been working on for a while. And over the past week, I've been working on this project as a academic article for submission. So I figured, since it's what I'm working on, it's what I will present to YouTube. I think, again, this is cool because it's something that only a few people at an academic conference would see, but getting to present it to people on YouTube, I really do relish that opportunity. So without further ado, let's begegin. As you can see on this title slide, you have various representations of the Chollima statue in this sport magazine called 체육생활, which was released during the Chollima era. I believe all of these magazines are on the website for the Library of Congress in the United States, so if you want to access them, you can find them that way. And so the main thrust of this lecture is that athletics were a huge part of shaping the DPRK society during the late 1950s and early 1960s, when the Chollima movement was at its peak. And this kind of formed somewhat of the basis for the DPRK society we see today as they came out of the Korean War, or Fatherland Liberation War, however you might want to call it. So here's the table of contents. It starts with an introduction, and then I introduce three main athletics policy reforms that occurred in the 1958, 1959, and 1960. And then we look at how those policy reforms would have affected what was going on in society during that time. So there was the agricultural collectivization, when everybody was pushed into collective farms and private farming was basically eliminated. We look at the mandatory technical education system, when basically every school child was forced to do technical education for a few years at secondary school. It was also a part of the Chollima work team movement, which encouraged development in the heavy industry sector, as well as kind of socializing those who were working in the heavy industry sector, kind of making them more into a communist human being, so to speak. And then there was the repatriation of Koreans from Japan to the DPRK, and then we'll kind of all wrap it up with conclusions of what I found. So there has been previous research on the Chollima movement. Obviously, lots of people focus on politics, literature, music, and education during that era. A lot of it is available in Korean language. And in the field of athletics, Yu Im-ah wrote 2 articles about record-setting track and field athlete Shin Kum-dan, and the portrayal of Shin in propaganda at that time. I would, if you have access to it, I would highly recommend reading that, because Shin Kum-dan was kind of very important at the time, and you see a picture of her to the right. And because she was a world record-setting track and field athlete for the DPRK, which the likes of which they wouldn't see again until Chang Sang-ok won the 1999 marathon at the World Athletics Championships. Athletics policy is a particularly important area because there were so many reforms in athletic policy that took place during this time. So obviously it was a part of the Chollima movement, and you can't kind of separate the two, I don't think. So first, we are going to look at the athletics reforms, and then we're going to contextualize them. So what were the athletics reforms? And here's the big long title: Cabinet Decision Number 30 on propagating sport and improving the fostering of athletics cadres. That's a big mouthful, but basically you can summarize it like this. The government wanted to establish firm central control. So we don't want people in Kaesong or Hamhung making decisions on their own. We want everything to come from the center. So they consolidated all of the athletics organizations under one big structure, top down, so that basically people in Pyongyang would be controlling the whole country systematically. Sporting clubs were reformed into sporting schools, so basically kind of more of a systemization of those who were being fostered into becoming athletes. And athletics cadres came from the center, from Pyongyang, to each city, to the athletics committee of each city. So basically those in Pyongyang would know what's going on in the athletics committee of each city. And so with this directive in 1958, the government wanted to develop sport in the cities. So counties were not mentioned, so basically this was a very urban-centered reform at first. Farms were not included, and we'll get into why that is later. The government wanted to popularize athletics as well. So news reports, documentary films about athletics were ordered to be developed. A regular newspaper called 체육 신문, and then a journal, which you see to the right, 체육과 스포츠, which would later be just known as 체육, they were both established and began to be produced around this time. So before this, if you wanted to read about athletics, you would kind of have to be looking at, maybe they had some books about it, but mostly just articles in the newspaper. There was an athletics journal in the late 1940s called 인민체육, or People's Athletics, but this journal was kind of a revitalization to start publishing after the publishing about athletics after the Korean War. So athletics was basically started to be developed after this cabinet decision. But then, less than a year later, there was another cabinet decision number 15. It was on developing sport and raising sports skill. So it can be summarized like this. There were a wider range of citizens included. So now it includes the cooperative farms. So basically, whether you are living in the city or in the countryside, you're going to be affected by this. And it included compulsory daily athletics time for all workers. So basically, no matter where you were in the country, you had to do athletics for an hour every single day. And this was government mandated. So really trying to push athletics out there. And the government emphasized competitive sports and elite athletes. So each school and workplace was to have competitive sports teams. So basically, not only are you just doing, like calisthenics or, like push-ups or something like that, you're on a team and you're competing against other people, and this is kind of trying to encourage that socialist competition, which they saw as necessary for increasing camaraderie and increasing production and things like that. The health of the youth and sports medicine were now starting to be emphasized, so that was also considered. And so organization, systemization, popularization, these were all continuously pushed forth under these directives, or under this new directive. And so I included this picture on the right just to kind of emphasize the sports medicine and the health aspects of this new directive. Because it says 생활을 문화 위생적으로. So so it's like lifestyle as sanitation culture. It's hard to translate, but basically like your lifestyle, just make it like we're establishing a culture of sanitation as a lifestyle, kind of something like that. Anyway, the last directive I will look at is on establishing the title of Master Sports Person of DPR Korea. And this was in 1960, so like a year later. And so it made a special title for those who had made an athletic contribution to the nation and received the admiration of the public. And this order implicitly encouraged competition for this honor. And if you received this title, you could be used as an example in propaganda. So as you see to the right here, it says 공훈 체육인들을 열렬히 축하합니다. So basically, congratulations to the new master sports people. And then you have pictures of them and who they were and what they did. So basically, this is kind of like an honor that you want. And so it's encouraging more elite athletes, I would say, at this time. So now we know what happened in the athletic sphere, but what was going on in the rest of society? And so we're going to look at the big social transformations that were going on, and then we're saying, how do athletics fit into that, right? So first, there was agricultural collectivization, which occurred basically from 1953 until 1958. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you're a private farmer, you're working on your own, you are going to be pushed into a huge collective where everything is decided by a collective committee. But in effect, they're all under the government. So basically everybody becomes a worker on a large scale government farm rather than just operating their own independent plot of land. So in 1953, the reason this was implemented was to combat decreased agricultural production capacity after the Korean War. It was to transform traditionalism and conservatism into a socialist mentality, and it was to help poor farmers and keep rich farmers in check. So not only do they want things to be equal, but they also don't want people who are richer to start getting more power and threaten the government. And they really do want to increase production capacity. And being a socialist state with other countries who had also collectivized, like the Soviet Union, they kind of saw this as their opportunity to become more industrialized, right? But there were problems initially, obviously, with such a huge social transformation that they're trying to carry out. Working teams were poorly organized due to poor training, and then there was a lack of manpower because the 3-year-long Korean War was devastating. So many people lost their lives, and the production capacity of the government or of the country was down. And so what was their solution? Discharged soldiers basically were mobilized to lead and provide labor force. So a huge amount of people were in the People's Army, and then they were all released from their duties, and they were a lot of them went out to the provinces and started to help out in agricultural work and kind of lead the agricultural teams, since they had the experience of leading army units during the war, and they kind of applied that leadership that they had. But of course, there were more problems in 1957 and 1958. There was continued inefficiency due to a lack of manpower and a lack of collectivist thought. A lot of people still thought about their individual well-being rather than the well-being of the unit. And there was a continual shuffling of cooperatives into larger units and straggling farm. And so, like, you know, you might join a cooperative, but then they'll merge it with another cooperative and another cooperative. And with all of this constant reorganization, it's kind of hard to be productive, as you can imagine. And then there were some straggling farmers who had not yet joined. It's something they couldn't do instantly. And, you know, there were some farmers who were rich and refused to join until they were absolutely forced to towards the end. Or there were some farmers who were really living far out, and they just weren't affected by the social changes until the very end. So these were the types of people that were the very last to become collectivized until they achieved full collectivization in August 1958. Or it was declared to be full. We you know, that's what they say. We can't verify it independently. But as you can see in the pictures on the right, in the upper picture, you have a farming collective, kind of what it might have looked like, or what a picture of what it looked like. I mean, just a huge amount of people all in one collective. And then they, in the lower picture, you see the ceremony. 100% collectivization was achieved in August 1958, and that was the ceremony that they held in Pyongyang for it. So what role does athletics have in all of this? And so when they used discharged soldiers to lead agricultural cooperatives from 1955 onward, this probably was part of the inspiration to send central athletics cadres to the provinces in 1958. So they're like, wow, you know, that was so successful when we sent soldiers from, you know, Pyongyang to the collectives in the provinces. Why don't we do that with athletics as well? So in this sense, athletics probably drew some inspiration from agricultural collectivization. And you can also see that the 1958 cabinet decision, which didn't include agricultural cooperatives, the reason that agricultural cooperatives weren't included is that they hadn't all been conglomerated yet, so there was still too much disorder, and they weren't included in athletics reforms until the next year when collectivization was basically already over. But another reason athletics reforms, including the farming collectives in 1959, was because agricultural production had stagnated, and workers were still largely not socialist in their mentality and their action. So they thought that athletics were kind of a way to push them towards that. So, the 1959 cabinet decision aimed at agricultural cooperatives in order to increase their production, collectivism, and sense of competition. So, and you can see on the right here, the upper photograph, you see people in a agricultural cooperative doing their chejo, or their kind of gymnastics or whatever. Like there's like an aerobic routine or just kind of like stretching, calisthenics, just really basic exercises to kind of get your body ready for the long work that you have to do. And then on the bottom, you can see a agricultural collective participating in shirum, or traditional Korean wrestling. So you can see how athletics were kind of used to, not only prepare the workers for working, but also kind of as a way to get them all familiar with each other and increase the camaraderie. And so the next big social reform that happened during the Chollima Era that I will talk about today is the mandatory technical education system, which was implemented from October 1958. Now, what does this mean? It basically, after the Korean War, the main economic focus of the DPRK was heavy industry at the expense of light industry and agriculture. The reason for that is because Kim Il-sung saw that as a way to become a more strong and powerful nation. They wanted to develop all three at the same time, but his emphasis was always on the heavy industry. And in order to develop heavy industry, you need more manpower, and you need people who understand technical things. You need technicians. From 1957, there was the first 5-year plan, which is a thing that socialist countries do. They make this 5-year plan with production goals, and it's designed to kind of increase the productivity of the economy. But there wasn't enough industrial manpower. So the mandatory technical education system was implemented in all secondary schools, save the elite schools, to prepare students to work in heavy industry immediately upon graduation. So basically, you used to go to a normal middle school, high school, secondary school, whatever you want to call it. Then after October 1958, everyone went to technical school instead of a normal middle school, high school, whatever. And only those in elite schools, so like if you're in like the magnet school, or just kind of like a school basically for advanced students, then you didn't go to this school. But basically, vast majority of the population went to technical schools. And so, how were the technical schools different from the normal schools? Well, students were expected to learn industrial work through hands-on exercises. So basically, you went and worked with industrial equipment at school. But that was the idea, right? But schools didn't have enough equipment, and factories found that students would hinder the production, and there weren't enough teachers with relevant experience. So, not only were there no equipment at school, if they went to the local factory to work with their equipment, then all of a sudden the production's down because you've got, young teenagers trying to learn how to work the equipment, and then the teachers don't know how to teach the children. So it was really poorly conceived plan. The mandatory, and so they recognized this, and 3 years after it was implemented, the students' industrial work was downsized relatively, because ideological education became more important, because they were making the Juche, they were kind of setting the stage for the Jucheification of society, when everything became very much about Kim Il-sung and more socialism, things like that. The technical aspects were decreased, and then by 1966 they said, okay, not everybody has to go to technical school anymore. Only a select few high schools will be technical schools from here on out. And so what did athletics have to do with this? Well, the 1958 decision created specialized sports schools for prospective athletes and coaches. These specialized sports schools were not a part of the mandatory technical education system. So advanced students did not go to technical schools, and then prospective athletes also did not go to technical schools. So that really shows how important the government viewed athletics and raising elite athletes. And so, I think one thing to take away from this is that elite athletic schools were on a small scale, but the technical education system was on such a large scale that it kind of explains why elite athletic schools survived, and then the mandatory technical education system was rolled back and downscaled. The 1959 decision mandated that students and teachers organize extracurricular athletics for 1 hour each day. And so if you think about it, students are now not only required to learn how to manufacture things in a heavy industry factory, which is a huge physical burden as opposed to just learning about it in school. At the same time, you are now forced to do athletics for an hour each day. So there's a huge increase in the physical burden on the students, and that's something to think about. And so another thing to think about is that athletics education doesn't require a huge amount of technical equipment. I mean, it depends on the sport, obviously, but that kind of made it easier to implement. So if all schools have to do 1 hour of athletics, that's something that's easily doable because you can just do running or sit-ups or push-ups or calisthenics or whatever, right? But if you say all schools have to do technical education, then they're all not immediately going to have the equipment or the know-how to do that right at the outset. And so what you can take from this is that, they wanted to socialize the society with technical education, but actually an easier method of socializing the society was using athletics education. And so athletics was really important for this purpose. And so now we get to the Chollima Work Team movement, which began in March 1959. Now, the Chollima movement had kind of been going on since a little bit before that. They didn't name it the Chollima movement, I think, until 1958. But basically, the Chollima movement was a technical and political movement which arose gradually after 1956 out of the need to conserve resources in the face of declining Soviet aid. Now, why was Soviet aid declining? Because there was the August Faction incident in 1956, which was basically Kim Il-sung, or basically in the government there used to be a Soviet faction, a Chinese faction, and a domestic faction. Basically the Soviet faction in the government was a little bit Soviet-leaning, the Chinese faction was a little bit Chinese-leaning, and the domestic faction was loyal to Kim Il-sung. And so Kim Il-sung said, we need to rid ourselves of people who used to live in the Soviet Union or who used to live in China or who have connections there. So they were all purged from government. And obviously, this really ruined relations with the Soviet Union, who demanded that some of the people be reinstated, which some people were reinstated after the Soviet Union demanded it, but only on a smaller scale. So really it was a big power grab by Kim Il-sung. But since relations had suffered, this meant that the Soviet aid that they had been getting after the war was going to decrease. So basically they kind of had to figure out how to produce more things domestically in order to keep up their economic growth. And so this was, and the Chollima movement kind of symbolized that. So we're going to be faster, we're going to be more efficient, we're going to save resources, we're going to develop heavy industry, all through this Chollima movement. And they chose a fast winged horse to kind of symbolize how fast and how hard everybody is going to work. And so the Chollima Work Team movement was designed to encourage socialist competition in the heavy industry sectors, and it had the goal of pushing forth the 5-year plan and realizing communist collectivism. And also, I think this is crucial, is the direct leadership role of the Central Party was emphasized. So basically, you cut out the middlemen, you cut out the bureaucrats, and everybody is not loyal to their immediate boss, they're loyal to the highest boss in Pyongyang, like Kim Il-sung or the party center or whatever. So people are just a little bit more loyal. So that was another big aspect of it. And there's lots of little things that you can get into, but this was kind of the main idea. And so how do athletics reforms work into the Chollima Work Team movement? Well, the 1959 decision demanded competitive athletic teams at workplaces, just as the Chollima Work Team movement encouraged socialist production competition. And this also encouraged a sense of collectivism. So they're both kind of encouraging the same goal. They were just doing it in different ways. And the 1959 decision also demanded central party control of regional athletics committees and athletics associations for each sport, just like the Chollima Work Team movement demanded party control of individual work teams. So same idea. The 1959 decision demanded the participation of the old and participation of women in athletics, and the Chollima work team movement also had the same aspect. And then also, if you consider the Master Sportsperson title, it gave an award to outstanding athletes, just as a similarly prestigious title was given to exemplary Chollima work teams. Like if you became a Chollima work team, and you won a title for it, then you got certain benefits. So basically, if you're good in production and you're good in sport, you're going to be rewarded. So it all kind of fits together, I think that, and so this is another argument that I make, that you can't separate athletics from what was going on in the Chollima era, because it was pursuing the same goals but in a different way. And you see right here on the right, you see this. This is a Chollima work team doing their morning calisthenics. So literally people who were in the Chollima work team movement were affected by these athletic reforms. And the last event I will talk about is the repatriation of Koreans in Japan from December of 1959. Now, Koreans initially went to Japan during the colonial era because they were usually mostly there by forced migration, because the Japanese Empire would mobilize them throughout their empire, I mean, not only just to Japan, but also Southeast Asia, and Sakhalin Island and places like that, so that they could get them to do work for little pay, basically just used as a labor force. There was also a little bit of conscription into the Japanese army, but that was very much later. And so a lot of these Koreans who had been forced to Japan couldn't go home after the end of World War II. Japan surrendered and Korea became free, but then neither the North nor the South provided a free way to get back to the Korean peninsula. So a lot of them, so they had to do it under their own money, but they were all often very poor. So they would board boats and kind of do it on their own, but there was still a huge amount of Koreans left over in Japan in the 1950s and 60s, and obviously there's descendants of those Koreans still living in Japan to this day. Yeah, and so it took the DPRK forming a relationship with Japan to kind of get this ball rolling, but from at least the 14th of July to 1958, Kim Il-sung planned on repatriating as many Koreans in Japan as possible, and he made a formal invitation to them that October. And so why would he do this? It's because there was not enough manpower and technically skilled workers. So some of the Koreans living in Japan, they had technical know-how, and they just generally needed more bodies to fulfill their economic goals and fill work. So they thought, well, why don't we just bring in all these Koreans from Japan, and that will solve some of our problems. And so it ended up working. The propaganda worked, and until 1967, 88,611 Koreans, roughly, in Japan migrated to the DPRK, and the vast majority of them were coming in 60-61. So if you can imagine, 1960 and 1961 were a huge social change, because there's just this huge swath of people coming in from Japan. And these repatriations would continue on smaller scale until 1984. Oh, and if you look on the right at the top, you see them arriving, I believe, in Wonsan. So there was a huge propaganda thing. Everybody was welcoming the repatriates from Japan, and then on the bottom you see them arriving to Pyongyang by bus. So it was really a big social event when the Koreans in Japan returned to the northern part of Korea. So athletic reform. So how do I view this in terms of athletic reforms? The 1959 decision, which demanded mandatory communal exercise and competitive athletics teams, provided a method through which repatriated Koreans could adjust to life in the DPRK. So, you might think about it, like if you think about it, Koreans who have been living in Japan, maybe their Korean was a little bit rough. They don't know all of the socialist and collectivist aspects of the DPRK that had formed over the previous 10 years. And they're moving into an area where they don't know anybody. And a really easy way to kind of integrate into any society is to start playing on athletics teams with people who are living there. And so I think that the increase in athletics would kind of increase the camaraderie and the integration of those who had come from Japan. And as this photograph you can see, Kim Il-sung, who is smiling and sitting to the left, is welcoming a huge amount of Koreans who had come in from Japan. And so here's my conclusion. Athletics reforms took from the success of the party leadership and cadre training efforts of collectivization. Athletics reforms also helped alleviate the labor force and ideological problems that occurred during collectivization. Athletics reforms also increased the labor burden of secondary school students who had to do industrial work. Athletics reforms also spurred further competition amongst Chollima work teams. And lastly, athletics reforms encouraged repatriated Koreans in Japan to adjust to DPRK societies. And so like all other societal movements occurring at this time, athletics reforms were politicized. And uniquely, athletics reforms, we have collectivization, we have the Chollima work team movement, we have the technical education system, we have people coming in from Japan, but all of these things only affected one sector of society, and they didn't affect everybody. On the other hand, athletics affected every single person in all four of these movements. Athletics was something that everybody would have to do in school, everybody would have to do at work. Maybe if you were older, and you were retired, you didn't have to do athletics, but aside from them, basically everybody had to do athletics. So athletics reforms were really important because it was a way of collectivizing everybody, no matter how old you were or what gender you were or whatever. Basically, so it's an inextricable part of the collectivization or of the socialization of society at this time, and that's why I think it's really important to understand how it was kind of weaved into the fabric of everything that was going on at the time, and kind of an essential component of the government completing its agenda at that time. So, athletics reforms are a universal tool of control, and they played a pivotal role in setting the foundation for the eventual Jucheization of the entire society over the following decades. Now, what is Jucheization of the entire society? Well, to kind of sum it up in a nutshell, in the 1970s, after Kim Jong-il became the successor, there became a huge intensification of the personality cult of the Kims, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il. And it kind of was pushed into there was a huge heavy amount of really intense propaganda about like leader worship and things like that. And that all occurred during the 1970s. And I think that what occurred during the 50s and 60s, with an increased sense of collectivism, control from the center, an increased sense of socialist values, I think that all kind of helped set the tone for the complete huge intensification of the personality cult in the 1970s, and which is the foundation for the DPRK as it is today. So again, athletics hugely important when you consider the DPRK and its development. And so congratulations, you have made it to the end of the presentation. Yeah, so I know that this is a lecture. It's not going to get a huge amount of views or attention. So if you've watched to this point of the lecture, I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to you. But from the outside of DPRK Athletics, while I do want to get more views and attention on my work, my principle has always been to make something that I would want to see, and I would want to see this lecture. And not only that, I want to make things that are educational and something that somebody can actually learn from. So I hope that this can kind of educate people about what is going on in the DPRK of society, and reach an audience of people that might not necessarily be digging through scholarly journals and finding my work. So anyway, we've got a lot more broad appeal, exciting videos coming up. We're going to be following Ne Koi Hang to Myanmar, where they will play in the AFC Champions League in November. And up until then, I still have many exciting videos in the works about my trip to the DPRK in 2017. As well as some exclusive footage of DPRK athletics events that it has never been released online, and hopefully we'll be able to show that and provide some commentary and translation of those. So stay tuned. There's a lot of exciting things happening in DPRK Athletics, as well as the upcoming, if you're interested in travel or food, my upcoming personal channel, which I will launch as soon as I possibly can, will have a huge amount of travel, food videos, maybe even a little bit of video games, just kind of more about me personally. But I think that there's a little bit of a cross section. So look forward to all of that. It's a very exciting time to be here, be alive. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and if you're still here, leave a like, leave a comment, head on over to the Discord if you want to spark up some discussion about DPRK athletics. That's all. 안녕히 계십시오. 여기는 서울입니다.